All right, hello zoology people, here to get into our discussion on nematodes. So interesting group of animals. So again, not in the normal sequence that we would cover phylogenetically, this group. So again, it's more of a comparative, compare group to the Platyhelminthes, but again, not necessarily phylogenetically close to the Platyhelminthes. So I present to you now the nematodes, the roundworms. So in cross section again, they're not going to be flattened like Platyhelminthes. They're going to be circular. They're going to be round, cylindrical in cross section. So these are just some pictures, some examples of this group, right? A very prevalent, very common group. So nematodes have a couple of big evolutionary distinctions from Platyhelminthes. So for one, we now have a complete digestive system. So if we go back, we talk about the cnidarians, the Platyhelminthes, the planarians. So they had that gastrovascular cavity, that one opening, one hole, food coming in, food going out, the same opening. Well, this is, I think you're going to agree, a big evolutionary step. These worms now have a mouth, a simple but a complete digestive system where then the waste is released out the anus. So they have a mouth for food ingestion and anus for waste disposal. So that's, again, a big deal in the evolutionary process. We're trying to get the digestive system more elaborate, more complex. So again, they have a little pharynx, an intestine. So again, more elaborate than the Platyhelminthes. So if if you analyze the human system, wow, we can link it sort of back. We can phylogenetically trace back to this very humble beginnings of a complete digestive system. They do also have a protective cuticle made of collagen. So if you heard the term cuticle for the nails, that's something very similar to that protective layer around these nematodes. So again, that's a pretty thick layer. At that layer, at that microscopic level, that layer does offer them a fair amount of protection. So you are an animal with a complete digestive system. You have a protective cuticle around you. It's going to make ecological sense as to why these things are so abundant, why they're so common in their habitats. Something that's a little bit maybe hard to see from this picture is that they have a body wall with longitudinal muscles. So the muscles are going to run lengthwise, and they don't have the circular muscles. So that is going to have some impact on their movement. When they move, they kind of wiggle around all chaotically. That, again, just a characteristic for this group. Size range, they range from 82 micrometers. So that's a micrometer is 1,000th of a millimeter. That's, tiny microscopic, to over 8 meters in length. So there's some nematodes that act as parasites on whales, right? You imagine how long the intestines of a whale would be. Actually, some placental parasites that are known specifically to this sperm whale. So from 82 micrometers to 8 meters in length. So it's a very big size range in this group here. So ubiquity and abundance. So here's a $10 word there, right? Ubiquitous. Ubiquitous is a fancy way of saying everywhere, right? So nematodes can be found everywhere. They're ubiquitous. They're in many different types of habitats, aquatic, terrestrial. They can be free living, minding their own business in the soil, or they can be inside a host acting as a parasite, right? Depends on the individual species. So once we say they're ubiquitous, they're found in this particular habitat. Now another aspect, the abundance, the actual individual number of or the number of the individual worms per unit area is immense, right? So there are many thousands of individual nematodes in a handful of garden soil. So we go out, we get a handful of garden soil, we can analyze thousands of individuals of nematodes. So again, very, very abundant. Interesting statistic, about 75% or more of all animals on Earth are actually nematodes. So we know there's a lot of insects, there's a lot of bees and a lot of other, aquatic organisms. But again, if we were to analyze the individual number of all the animals alive right now on planet Earth, about 75% or more of all animals on Earth are nematodes. So again, it's a very, very prevalent group. A lot of times it doesn't get a lot of focus. People don't spend a lot of time analyzing this group unless we're talking about the parasitic individuals. But collectively as a whole, very ubiquitous, very abundant. And again, I couldn't find an actual number of species. The lowest range was 26,000 individual species. And then I was finding some statistics on the high end, over 100 million species. But again, a lot of individual worms, and then they're going to look relatively similar, right? They're still kind of primitive. So unless a lot of phylogenetic research goes in, a lot of DNA sequencing, we're not necessarily going to know the species very easily, not morphologically. So again, the big question mark on the individual species number count. So being that they're so ubiquitous, so abundant, they are going to have ecological significance. So they are medically important. Right? So we're going to get into some actual discussion here. So most humans will experience a nematode parasite at some point in their life. So it's just the statistical chance of you having some parasitic infection is quite high, right? At any given moment, 25 to 33% of the global population is infected with nematodes. So again, that's a pretty big statistic on a global scale. And these parasitic infections typically can cause some not very pleasant diseases for sure. I'm not going to focus too much on the agriculture aspect. I'm going to kind of focus more on the human impact, but worms can have a detrimental effect on the agricultural sort of crop, harvest and yields. So again, they do serve as sort of parasites on plants in some cases. So agriculturally important and academically important. They're an interesting taxon to research and to study. Some interesting aspects. They are able to undergo cryptobiosis. So that's a big deal, right? This is like, wow. Cryptobiosis is the ability to put your life on pause, right? To kind of pause metabolism when conditions are too cold, too dry, too hot. Just the environment is not conducive to life. What do? They kind of put their life on pause, basically, right? They undergo this cryptobiosis. There's a couple of other groups that do this. I don't know if you've heard the tardigrades, little water bears, some other species of worms, rotifers. But again, these individuals can do that, which makes them, again, just an ecological, force to deal with. So abundant, diverse, wide size range, different ecologies. Just again, a lot of things to cover when we cover worms, the nematodes. Reproduction. So they gets a little bit elaborate here as well. So gonochory or gonochoristic type of, basically what we say male and female sex, like humans. We have a female that produces eggs, a male that produces sperm in separate bodies. So that there are some species of nematodes that have the gonochoristic type of sex, male, separate female. We have a particular well-known worm that basically has two sexes, a regular male, but then we have a hermaphroditic individual. So running out, existing out in their habitat, you have the male and then a hermaphrodite, which has the male and female aspects. So the hermaphrodite can reproduce with the single males out there, or they can self-fertilize. So that again offers the idea of different type of genetic recombination. It offers the ability to self-fertilize when there's, not suitable males around. So it gets kind of interesting there. We have the idea of some worms being parthenogenetic, where they're all females. The entire population is females. There's no males, but the females reproduce asexually. They ovulate unfertilized eggs that hatch, and again, it gets kind of interesting there. And then Trioichi, this one's interesting as well. It's kind of the reverse of the male hermaphrodite system. So you have a hermaphrodite and females, and we can also have males. So it's weird, right? So again, trying to put all this together, we have worms that are very ubiquitous. Well, why are they so abundant? Why are they so common? Well, they have basically every reproductive strategy that you can think of in place. So they become very fertile. They become very fecund. They can reproduce very, very easily and abundantly. Right? So these worms. I'm just gonna kind of elaborate on this one just because it is a species that is very, very well studied. Caenorhabditis elegans, right? Or just for short, we call it C. elegans. C. elegans. So C. elegans is a free-living nematode, so it doesn't parasitize humans, doesn't mess with being in our system. Free-living, and it's used in genetics and developmental research. So this was the first multicellular organism to have its complete genome sequenced. So that's a big deal. If you participate in these, inheritance type of programs, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, where they analyze your DNA and they can kind of match, and you're gonna maybe be likely to develop this condition, or you're not gonna develop this condition. Well, all that has been made possible by, this early research on C. elegans, right? Learning how to sequence all of the DNA in the worm cell, in the nucleus. And we now have the complete sequence for mice and rats and other animals and humans, but this was the that starting model, right? This little worm. Something else that's unique is this idea of uteli, right? Utelic organisms. Uteli is defined as cell constancy. So for us, for humans, right, we have trillions of cells, and if we get injured, we continue to make more cells. And as a baby, how does a baby get from a baby to an adult? It undergoes mitosis and adds more cells. Well, these worms can't do that. They have a finite number of cells. And we know that they have 959. So around, just say 1,000, but it's 959 cells in the adult worm. So how does a worm grow? Right? As a juvenile, it has 959 cells. Well, when it grows, it doesn't add more cells. It just makes their own cells, they hypertrophy, they get bigger. Right? So that's unique in this regard. And that offers a really good insight on a lot of developmental research, and they can manipulate this system and learn a lot about these. But just to summarize this intro, a lot of diversity, a lot of abundance, a lot of reproductive adaptations. I don't think roundworms will go extinct anytime soon, right? And again, it's a very, very successful group of species of phylum, right? Phylum Nematodum. So with that one, let me stop this one here, and I'm going to continue onwards a bit.